I speak now to Dan Perry, he's former chairman of the Foreign Press Association of Israel. He joins us now from Tel Aviv. Thank you for your time. So we had their growing chorus of international human rights bodies criticising the Israeli army's conduct against hospitals and medical workers in Gaza. Now, Israel's long-standing defence, as you well know, is that the army is targeting Hamas operatives and infrastructure in those facilities. So I wonder how you respond to these comments by UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk, who says that Israel has not provided sufficient information to substantiate many of these claims. They say they are often vague, they're broad. In some cases, they even appear to be contradicted by publicly available information.
Well, I'm not sure I can justify anything because I'm not representing the Israeli government. I know what are their claims, and you mentioned some of them in the report. Whether they provided sufficient evidence to back it up is subjective, clearly. I would tend to agree that I would like to see more substantiation of Israel's claims. That said, I can't simply dismiss them as irrelevant. International humanitarian law is a little bit fuzzy on what to do with when your armed terrorist combatants have taken over a medical facility and are hiding among the genuine patients and using it indeed as their main operating base in a place like Jabalia.
Right, but the problem is that there is no evidence of that. There is no evidence. Where is the evidence? Why has in the last year not been enough sufficient evidence? We've had 136 Israeli recorded attacks on 27 health facilities. Shouldn't there be more evidence to support that?
Yes. Again, I would appreciate not being cut off. But yes, I would like to see more evidence. That said, but they have supplied some evidence. Whether it's enough or not is in the eye of the beholder. Consider the Kamal Redwan hospital last week. The reporting on some channels basically suggested that Israel means to attack medical facilities. My experience with Israel tells me that's extremely unlikely. Israel then claimed, showing some evidence, but maybe not enough evidence, that the place had been used by Hamas to reestablish a presence in Jabalia, indeed as its command center in Jabalia. They claimed to have arrested or killed 300 Hamas terrorists in that hospital. Furthermore, when they were allowing patients to come out, they discovered that about half the patients were not actually patients, and they arrested them as young men who are Hamas operatives. Now, I'd like to see, like you, and like UN officials, yet more evidence. However, I don't think I can simply dismiss these claims. And the pressure should be applied on Israel to apply IHL maximally. No doubt about that.
Right, okay.
And there's no doubt. There's enormous suffering of the population in Gaza. But from my perspective, I'd like to see equal, maybe greater pressure on Hamas to stop playing these games. And if you think Hamas is unable, it is not likely to be doing just this, I fear you don't know enough about Hamas.
Let's talk about these ongoing ceasefire talks that are going on in Doha, the Israeli delegation meeting with Hamas. How serious do you think the Israelis are about a ceasefire at this point?
Oh, I think maybe not so serious. But again, I think Hamas may not be so serious. These sides, incredibly, still don't seem ready to be significantly flexible in these talks. And from Israel's perspective, I strongly suspect that the government thinks that they will have more leeway to create even more leverage against Hamas once Trump arrives at the White House. So that's what, 16 days away? I doubt Israel is going to show much flexibility during that time because I think they do have this advantage. Now, Trump, of course, wants the war to end quickly, but he's also less likely to put guardrails in Israel's way, and therefore I suspect that even though Trump may well succeed in getting the war to end sooner rather than what Biden might have been able to achieve, it goes through a period of, if anything, escalation.
Dan, there have been more anti-government protests in Israel, more expected later today from families of Israeli captives and activists. How much frustration is there inside Israel that the government has failed to bring the captives home yet?
Enormous. Enormous frustration. Look, there's cognitive dissonance in Israel. On the other hand, in this country that is incredibly divided on almost every topic under the sun, there is rare consensus that Hamas cannot be allowed to remain in Gaza, given October 7th and the barbarism of that day, given the fact that they threatened to do it again and again, And also, for those Israelis who care about, their compatriots in Gaza, they think it's terrible for the Palestinians to be ruled by this demonic organization. So that's a consensus. On the other hand, they notice that the government of Israel seems to be playing some games with its endgame in Gaza, because it has blocked the creation of an alternative to Hamas by refusing to discuss the Palestinian Authority retaking the Strip or even much of anything else. So Israelis want Hamas gone, that's true. But given that they observe their own government being unable to articulate a plausible day after scenario and basically failing to completely snuff out Hamas in 15 months now, I think most of the public in Israel would be inclined to bite the bullet and agree essentially to Hamas's terms of ending the war and taking back the hostages, and of receiving back the hostages and giving up quite a few Palestinian prisoners, many of whom have blood on their hands and so forth, in exchange for an end to the war. They don't do that happily because they do support removing Hamas from Gaza, but it doesn't seem to be happening, and there is great impatience with the war, and what there primarily is a desire to rescue whoever can still be rescued from among the 100 people that were taken to Gaza and remain there.
Okay, thank you for your time, Dan Perry, former chairman of the Foreign Press Association of Israel, speaking to us there from Tel Aviv.
Thank you.
Let's bring in Mansour Shuman. He's a Palestinian journalist and humanitarian worker who has lived in Gaza until March of this year. Mansour, good to have you on the programme. You were listening in to what Dan Perry had to say. What do you make of perspectives like his? He acknowledged to a certain extent that there should be more pressure on Israel to provide the evidence that Hamas operatives are operating inside hospitals. But he said there should be also a lot of pressure, more pressure on Hamas itself to do the same. What do you make of comments like that?
Okay. I lived in Gaza together with my family. And during this genocide, I stayed in Al-Shifa Hospital and in Nasr Hospital, the two biggest hospitals in Gaza. None of us could see any evidence of what Dan is saying. And I think that Dan thinks that the audience have a very short-term memory. A few months back, they used to say that Al-Shifa was the command and control center for Hamas in Gaza Strip. And what evidence did they have to show the whole world? Nothing, right? So I think that Israel's plans right now is to execute the general's plan, which is to try to annex the north of Gaza. And they understand that hospitals are the only areas that have fuel, hence have electricity, hence have internet, hence are able to sustain people. So people live inside hospital grounds, live around hospitals. So for them, targeting hospitals means that if they take out this hospital, it's like taking out food or water or shelter. Like that's the central community for the Palestinians in that region.
Let's speak now to Dan Perry, he's former Associated Press chief editor for Europe, Africa and the Middle East. He joins us now live from Tel Aviv. Many thanks for your time. Every day, Dan, there are more global organizations and voices raised in condemnation against Israel's conduct in Gaza, particularly these attacks on hospitals and medical workers. I wonder, as someone who lives in Israel, how do the majority of Israelis feel about this criticism? Do they still support the government and its actions in Gaza as strongly as they did a year ago?
Look, most Israelis don't support this government, polls show. Most Israelis, indeed, through gritted teeth, would accept the idea of ending the war and leaving Hamas in power in Gaza in exchange for all the hostages. They don't want that, but they would probably agree. Because of just impatience with having their hostages there and having this war continue. And no, they don't like the criticism. But there's also a sense, I must tell you, that these global organizations that are presented sometimes in the media as impartial are in fact implicitly anti-Israel. They view Oxfam as part of the global left that's always going to criticize Israel. They don't necessarily see as the word from on high every time a UN official condemns their actions. That said, there is a legitimate debate in Israel itself about what to do, given their conviction that Hamas does operate from within hospitals and mosques and schools, with the express purpose of forcing Israel to attack those civilian installations in order to cause damage to civilians, because that serves them and their propaganda. Now, I heard Mansour come on after me 2 hours ago and deny that when he was in Shifa Hospital, he saw Hamas fine. Israel's provided evidence to the contrary, and I haven't been there in the past year to investigate myself. It might not be so safe. I can't resolve these disputes. I can tell you that Israel is internally conflicted about what is going on. They'd like to see it end, but they also feel that sometimes international organizations and international media that give Hamas a pass on this tactic that they really do believe Hamas does are being naive at best and complicit at worst. All I think we can usefully do right now is urge all sides to end the war as quickly as possible. And I think that even as we call on Israel to provide more evidence of their claim that, for example, a Kamal Adwan hospital in Jabalia had been used by Hamas, and they were able to kill or arrest 300 Hamas people from within the hospital and its immediate environs not a week or two ago. I think even as we demand Israel be more transparent and provide more evidence of all this, we also probably should be putting more pressure on Hamas. And indeed, it is rather striking to me that given the absolute cataclysm that Hamas has brought upon the people of Gaza, there isn't more pressure from the entire Arab world to basically get them to lay down their arms and hand over the hostages. What happens after that? How to prevent Israel from taking land in Gaza, which the vast majority of people in Israel don't want at all, but some people in a coalition do want. How to make sure that what follows Hamas in Gaza is a proper Palestinian authority, Palestinian government, hopefully in a not too distant future, Palestinian independence. That's pressure that will have to be applied on Israel for sure. But right now, we need pressure on Hamas.
Right. And Dan, just stay with us a moment, because I just want to share with viewers that protesters in Israel have been following the head of the Knesset Security Committee as he was on his way to pray, demanding the return of Israeli captives who are held in Gaza. Take a look at this footage showing Israeli activists on social media platform X showing protesters following Yuli Edelstein holding signs. He was heading from his home to the synagogue in central Israel. Dan, coming back to you, clearly a lot of frustration domestically with the family of captives, that the government hasn't been able to get the captives home. We know ceasefire negotiations are going on in Doha. What do you feel is the likelihood that they will amount to something more concrete, given the pressure domestically?
That is exactly equivalent to the likelihood that Hamas will drop its demand for an end to the war and Israel to leave and leave them in power in Gaza in exchange for even the first phase of the hostages. Since I can assume that we can agree that the likelihood of Hamas doing that is very low, the likelihood of the talks succeeding is low as a direct consequence as well. Moreover, Israel's waiting, I believe, for Donald Trump to take office because they think they'll have greater leeway and more of a permission to basically put, and your viewers will hate this, more humanitarian pressure on Gaza within the bounds of the laws they interpret it, but more pressure in order to get Hamas to finally relent. I'm not so sure this is going to a happy place very soon.
So you don't feel that Prime Minister Netanyahu is under pressure from Donald Trump, who has indicated that he wants the war in Gaza to be over?
Yeah, look, I think he will come under such pressure. But when Trump says, get this done, I think what Trump means is, I don't care about the consequences, just get it done in any way you possibly can so it's over with, and I can take credit for having brought peace, no matter how it was achieved. I do not think Donald Trump cares about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And therefore, Netanyahu would have a freer hand. Now, as someone who has friends in Gaza and who worked in Gaza and who cares about Gaza, this is rather heartbreaking to me because I think the strategy probably is wrong. Because my own view is that Hamas doesn't care about the consequences of the people of Gaza. So if Israel inflicts greater pain on the people of Gaza in order to get them to rebel or to get Hamas to relent, that won't work. Because Hamas is perfectly prepared to see masses of civilian casualties in Gaza. I suspect they're happy about it. This is a level of inhumanity that this demonic organization is capable of. I'm rather convinced. And so I don't see how we get out of this without massive Arab world pressure on Hamas in every way that it can possibly be applied to lay down their arms and return the hostages.
Dan Perry, former Associated Press chief editor for Europe, Africa and Middle East, speaking to us there from Tel Aviv. Thank you.